The persistent dripping of acid rain against metal was the only music Shaw ever knew these days. Each drop hitting the corrugated roof of his workshop sent tiny metallic pings echoing through the cramped space. Nature's heartbeat in a place where nature had long been conquered. Outside, Chrysum below sprawled in all its decrepit glory, a subterranean maze of forgotten souls, industrial waste, and the remnants of humanity's arrogance. Shaw hunched over his workbench, fingers dancing across holographic screens as he manipulated data strings. Identity reconfiguration, a fancy term for forgery in this brave new world, had become his reluctant specialty. Not that anyone used such terms openly anymore. In Chrysum below, you either had an identity or you didn't. Those who didn't simply cease to exist in the eyes of the world above. The amber light from his monitors cast long shadows across his gaunt face. At 43, Shaw looked closer to 60. Life underground did that to a person. His eyes, once a vibrant blue, had faded to a washed-out gray that matched the monotony of his existence. He hadn't always been this way, a ghost among ghosts, hiding in the seams of society. There was a time when he had a name that meant something, when his fingers served the system instead of subverting it. But that was before the guilt, before the little girl with copper hair whose file he'd hesitated to delete. Just a moment's hesitation. That's all it took for them to catch her, to make her disappear. Shaw blinked away the memory and focused on the identity template before him. A simple job for a local scavenger who needed access to the middle sectors. Nothing complicated, nothing dangerous, just enough credits to keep his generators running another week. The workshop around him was sparse but functional, a collection of outdated hardware cobbled together with stolen parts, a cot in the corner beneath a tangle of exposed pipes, a small heating element that doubled as a stove. The walls were fortified with salvaged metal, and the single entrance was secured with 3 different locks, paranoia being the only reliable currency in Chrysum below. Outside, the Undercity continued its perpetual twilight existence. Neon signs flickered weakly through the smog, casting sickly rainbows across puddles of chemical runoff. The corporate towers of Upper Chrysum pierced the artificial sky above, gleaming monuments to the privileged few who lived in sunshine and clean air. Down here, the corporations dumped their waste and their unwanted, the unregistered, the modified, the aliens, anyone who didn't fit neatly into the sanitized vision of society. Shaw sent the completed ID to the secure terminal and wiped his hands on a rag that had long ago forgotten what clean felt like. Another day, another identity, another link in the invisible chain that kept him tethered to this place. He reached for the bottle of synthetic whiskey on the shelf, his nightly ritual of chemical amnesia. That's when the knocking came. 3 sharp raps against the reinforced door. Then silence. Shaw froze, fingers hovering over the bottle. Nobody knocked at his door. His clients used the encrypted channel, and raids didn't announce themselves with polite knocking. 3 more knocks, more urgent this time. Drawing the stunner from beneath his workbench, Shaw approached the door cautiously. The security monitor showed a blurred figure, the acid rain interfering with the camera's sensors. He couldn't make out details, only that whoever stood there was a slight build and appeared to be hunched over. "Who is it?" he called, voice gruff from disuse. "Please." The voice was feminine, strained. "I need help." Shaw's finger hovered over the lock release. Every instinct told him to ignore it, to return to his whiskey and his solitude. Strangers meant trouble, and trouble meant attention, the one thing he couldn't afford. "Go away," he said. "Try the shelters in Sector 7. They won't take us without IDs." The voice cracked. "Please, I just need a job. No one will hire me. My child is sick." Something in her desperation pierced the carefully constructed armor around Shaw's conscience. The mention of a child sent an unwelcome ripple of memory through him. Copper hair, wide eyes, a hesitation that cost everything. Against his better judgment, he disengaged the first lock. "Stand back from the door," he instructed. The heavy metal door slid open with a hydraulic hiss, revealing a sight Shaw was entirely unprepared for. A woman, no, not human, a Sylvani female, stood trembling in the dim light of the corridor. Her silvery skin had the faint luminescent quality characteristic of her species, though dulled by exhaustion and malnutrition. In her arms, she cradled a small bundle wrapped in what looked like discarded thermal padding. But it was her eyes that caught Shaw off guard. Large, almond-shaped, with vertical pupils that contracted in the relative brightness of his workshop. They weren't the solid obsidian of pure Sylvani, but featured flecks of amber, indicating mixed heritage. "Please," she repeated, her voice barely audible above the constant drip of the pipes overhead. "I'll clean, repair, whatever you need. I just need somewhere safe for tonight. My little one is burning up." As if on cue, the bundle in her arms stirred, and Shaw caught a glimpse of a small face, similar to the mother's, but with even more pronounced human features. The child's breathing was labored, each inhale a visible struggle. Every alarm in Shaw's mind screamed at him to close the door. Harboring unregistered aliens, especially a hybrid child, was a guaranteed one-way ticket to the processing centers. The sweepers would wipe him from existence without a second thought. Yet as the woman swayed slightly on her feet, Shaw found himself stepping aside. "Get in," he said curtly. Quickly, relief flooded her features as she hurried inside. Shaw sealed the door behind her, engaging all 3 locks with methodical precision. "I'm Kaylin," she offered, adjusting her precious cargo in her arms. "This is Elu." Shaw didn't respond immediately, busying himself with checking the security feeds to ensure she hadn't been followed. Satisfied that the corridor remained empty, he turned back to assess his unexpected guests. Kaylin stood awkwardly in the center of his workshop, looking even more fragile in the unforgiving light. Her clothes were mismatched salvage, typical underground fashion, but clean, suggesting she made efforts despite her circumstances. The child in her arms appeared to be around 4 or 5 years old, with skin that held a fainter luminescence than her mother's. Her eyes were closed, face flushed with fever. "I don't run a shelter," Shaw said finally, returning to his workbench and putting away the stunner. "And I don't have medicine." "We don't need medicine," Kaylin replied. "Just somewhere dry, away from the spore vents. The air in the lower tunnels is making her sicker." She hesitated. "And if you have work, any work, I can pay back your kindness." Shaw studied her for a long moment. Sylvanis were known for their engineering aptitude, something about the structure of their hands and their enhanced vision in low light. But they were also known for their inability to lie convincingly. Their skin would literally dim when they attempted deception. And right now, Kaylin's skin, though dull with exhaustion, remained steady in its faint glow. "There's a cot in the corner," he said, nodding toward his sparse sleeping area. "Put the child there. I'll clear some duct space for you in the morning. The vents on level 3 need cleaning, and my hands are too big for the work." Kaylin's relief was palpable. Her skin brightened almost imperceptibly as she carried her daughter to the cot, murmuring softly in the melodic language of her people. As she laid the child down, Shaw caught a glimpse of the girl's neck, bare of the identity chip implant that every registered person carried. No wonder they'd been turned away everywhere. No identity, no existence. That was the law of Chrysum. Shaw turned away, reaching again for his bottle. He poured a finger of the amber liquid into a chipped cup and downed it in one burning swallow. He told himself this arrangement would be temporary, 1 night, maybe 2, just long enough for the child to recover, for the mother to earn enough for a night at a hostel. He told himself it wasn't pity that made him open the door. He told himself it wasn't guilt that made him stay. The lies tasted more bitter than the synthetic whiskey. 3 days stretched into a week, then 2. Shaw hadn't intended for Kaylin and Elu to become fixtures in his workshop, yet somehow they had. Kaylin proved herself useful beyond his expectations, her slender fingers perfect for navigating the intricate duct systems that honeycombed the walls of Chrysum below. Each day she would disappear into the maintenance tunnels with tools strapped to her back, returning hours later covered in grime, but with handfuls of salvage. Copper wiring, microprocessors, the occasional intact circuit board. Shaw found himself restructuring his living space, clearing a storage nook to create a sleeping area for Kaylin and her daughter. It wasn't much, just enough room for a salvage foam mattress and a storage bin for their meager possessions. But it was more consideration than he'd shown another living being in years. Elu recovered slowly from her illness. Without proper medicine, Kaylin relied on traditional Silvani remedies, poultices made from synthesized plants and broths brewed for whatever nutrition packets Shaw could spare. The child was quiet, unnervingly so for one so young. She watched Shaw with solemn eyes when she thought he wasn't looking, tracking his movements across the workshop as he worked. On the 9th day, as Shaw was soldering a particularly delicate connection on an ID chip, he felt a presence at his elbow. Glancing down, he found Elu standing silently beside him, her wide eyes fixed on the glowing tool in his hand. "Dangerous," he said gruffly, shifting to block her view. "Go back to your corner." Instead of retreating, Elu pointed at the holographic display. "Tao," she said, her voice soft and slightly musical, like her mother's. "Tao make." Shaw frowned. "What?" "She's trying to say your name." Kaylin explained from where she was sorting the day's salvage. "I told her your name is Shaw, but she calls you Tao. It means maker in our dialect." "I'm not a maker," Shaw muttered, returning to his work. "And she shouldn't be watching this." But Elu remained, her small form a persistent shadow at his side. Eventually, Shaw sighed and pulled up a simple graphics program on a secondary screen, a relic from a time when education wasn't a privilege reserved for those with proper identification. "Here," he said, pushing the screen toward her. "Draw something." "Stay quiet." Elu's face brightened, her skin glowing slightly stronger as she tentatively touched the screen. Lines of light followed her fingertips, creating abstract patterns that seemed to pulse with her excitement. Shaw tried to focus on his work, but found his attention repeatedly drawn to the child's creations, swirling galaxies and geometric shapes that hinted at an intelligence beyond her years. That night, after Kaylin had tucked Elu into their makeshift bed, she approached Shaw as he ran system diagnostics on his equipment. "Thank you," she said simply, her luminescence dimmed to a night setting that cast soft shadows across her angular features. "For the program." "She hasn't been that animated since before." Shaw grunted non-committally. "Kid needs stimulation, brain development, and all that." Kaylin studied him with those unnerving vertical pupiled eyes. "You know about child development?" A memory flashed, copper hair, a file with developmental milestones meticulously documented. A hesitation, a mistake. "I read," he replied curtly. "There's time for that down here." Kaylin seemed to sense his withdrawal. She changed tactics, gesturing to the half-assembled ID chip on his workbench. "You make identities," she observed. "Not a question." Shaw tensed. "I fix equipment. That's all. The people who come to your door at odd hours, they don't come for equipment repairs." Her voice held no judgment, merely statement of fact. "They come for new lives." "Dangerous talk," Shaw warned, shutting down his system with more force than necessary, especially for someone without papers. Kaylin didn't flinch. "Is that why you hide down here?" "Because of the identities you create." Shaw's jaw tightened. "I hide because hiding keeps me alive. Same as you. Don't mistake temporary shelter for intimacy, Silvani." "You don't know me." "I know enough," Kaylin replied softly. "I know you opened your door when no one else would. I know you share your food with my daughter, even when supplies are low. I know your hands shake when you think about the past." Shaw stood abruptly, chair scraping against the metal floor. "Get some sleep. The main ventilation shaft in Sector 4 needs cleaning tomorrow. It's a bigger job, might take all day." He retreated to his own sleeping space, now just a thin mat near his workstation, and turned his back to her, a clear dismissal. But sleep eluded him. In the darkness, he could feel Kaylin's gaze lingering on him before she finally returned to her daughter's side. His hands did shake sometimes, not from withdrawal or illness, but from the weight of memory. He'd been a deletion specialist once, working for the Chrysum Identity Management Division. His job had been simple: remove the undesirables from the system, make them disappear with a few keystrokes. No records, no rights, no existence. It was all fine until the day he'd been assigned the copper-haired girl. 7 years old, half Martian heritage, eyes that stared out from the holographic file with innocent confusion. He'd hesitated, finger hovering over the deletion command. Just for a moment. Long enough for a supervisor to notice. Long enough for them to send someone else to finish the job and to deal with the girl in person. They'd come for Shaw the next day. He'd barely escaped, fleeing to the depths of Chryson below with nothing but the clothes on his back and the specialized knowledge in his head. Knowledge that eventually became his salvation and his prison. Now he created the very identities he once destroyed. A cosmic irony that tasted like ash in his mouth. Morning came, as it always did in Chryson below, with the artificial lighting gradually increasing to simulate dawn. Shaw rose from his restless sleep to find Kaylin already awake, preparing a meager breakfast from their supplies. Elu sat cross-legged on the floor, drawing patterns in the thin layer of dust that accumulated overnight. Sector 4, Shaw reminded Kaylin, accepting the bowl of reconstituted protein she offered. Take the east. Access tunnel, less security. Kaylin nodded, her movements efficient as she prepared for the day's work. She knelt beside Elu, speaking softly in their shared language. The child nodded solemnly, reaching up to touch her mother's face in what seemed like a ritual farewell. As Kaylin gathered her tools, the workshop's communications system crackled to life, an unusual occurrence this early. Shaw frowned, moving to the terminal. Information broadcast, announced a monotone voice. Attention residents of sectors 3 through 7. Mandatory identification verification will commence at 0900 hours. Chryson security forces will conduct door-to-door inspections. Harboring unregistered individuals is punishable by deletion. This is not a drill. The broadcast ended with a sharp tone that seemed to linger in the suddenly silent workshop. Shaw met Kaylin's wide-eyed gaze. Sweepers, she whispered, the word laced with fear. Her glow had dimmed dramatically, her body's instinctive response to danger. Shaw's mind raced. Sweepers were the enforcement arm of the Identity Management Division, specialized units tasked with physically removing unregistered individuals. They moved through the Undercity periodically, but rarely ventured as deep as Sector 5, where his workshop was located. Something had changed. They're expanding their reach, he muttered, more to himself than to Kaylin. Looking for someone specific, maybe, or something, Kaylin replied, her gaze falling on Elu, who had stopped drawing to listen to the broadcast. Hybrid children have become valuable. For research, the implication hung heavy in the air between them. Shaw felt a familiar coldness settle in his chest, the same feeling he'd experienced the day he'd fled the upper levels. Self-preservation warred with something else, something he'd thought long extinguished. The vent cleaning can wait, he decided, moving to his security monitors. They'll start at the sector boundaries and work inward. We have time. Time for what? Kaylin asked, clutching her tool bag like a shield. Shaw looked at her, then at Elu, who stared back with those uncannily intelligent eyes. The child who called him Tao-maker. The woman who had nowhere else to go. Time to give you options, he said finally. But first, I need to know everything. Who you really are. Why you're running. What happened to Elu's father. Kaylin's posture stiffened. For a moment, Shaw thought she might refuse. Then her shoulders slumped, and she set down her tool bag. Elu, she said gently, go to our space and practice your drawings, yes? Mother needs to speak with Tao. The child nodded, casting one last curious glance at Shaw before padding silently to their corner. Once she was out of earshot, Kaylin turned back to Shaw, her luminescence at its dimmest setting, a sign of deep distress among her people. My full name is Kaylinera Telsarovi, she began, her voice barely above a whisper. I was a registered alien resident of Upper Chryson. My husband, Eli, was human, a relocation specialist with the Colonial Affairs Office. Shaw's eyebrows rose slightly. Colonial Affairs was a mid-level bureaucracy that managed off-world settlements. Not particularly prestigious, but certainly legitimate. We met during the Centauri negotiations 5 years ago, Kaylin continued. I was part of the Silvani delegation, cultural liaison. We weren't supposed to fraternize, but she smiled faintly, the memory briefly brightening her glow. Eli was different. He saw people, not species. What happened to him? Shaw asked, though he suspected the answer. He discovered something. Files that weren't supposed to exist. Human Sylvani genetic compatibility studies, conducted without consent. When Elu was born with such strong human features, he began to investigate why. He found evidence that our meeting hadn't been coincidental, that certain officials had been encouraging Sylvani human pairings for generations, documenting the results. Shaw felt a chill. Breeding experiments. Kayla nodded. When he confronted his superiors, they labeled him a security risk. One night, he didn't come home. The next day, my resident status was revoked. My identity chip malfunctioned. Suddenly, I didn't exist. Neither did Elu. They deleted you, Shaw said, the familiar terminology tasting bitter on his tongue. We barely escaped the sweepers. They came to our apartment. I heard them in the corridor. We fled down the emergency chutes with nothing but what we could carry. Kalen glanced toward where Elu sat quietly drawing. We've been in Chrysom below ever since. 3 months now. Shaw processed this information, his expert mind filling in the gaps. Elu's hybrid nature makes her valuable. Not just for research, for leverage. If they have her, they control you. And if they control you, I know where Eli hid his evidence, Kalen confirmed. Or at least I know how to access it. That's why they haven't simply eliminated us. They need me to lead them to it. Everything clicked into place. The sudden sweeper activity, the unusually deep penetration into the lower sectors. This wasn't a routine roundup. It was a targeted hunt. Shaw ran a hand through his thinning hair. Self-preservation screamed at him to cut ties immediately, to send Kalen and Elu away before the sweepers traced them to his door. But another voice, one that had been silent for too long, whispered of redemption, of copper hair and a hesitation that came too late. I can give you new identities, he said finally. Not just patches or workarounds, complete profiles. New biometric markers, new histories. But it's not simple and it's not quick, especially for a hybrid child. Hope flickered across Kalen's features, brightening her natural glow. You would do that? Even knowing the risk. Shaw didn't answer directly. Instead, he moved to his workstation and activated protocols he rarely used. Secret partitions opened in his system, revealing tools and programs that represented the culmination of years in hiding. The sweepers will sweep, he said, fingers flying across the interface. But we have advantages. They'll work methodically, sector by sector. We have at least 3 days before they reach this workshop. By then, we need to be ready. Kalen approached, watching his complex algorithms unfolded on the screen. What can I do to help? Tell me everything about yourselves, Shaw replied, not looking up from his work. Every detail, no matter how small. The best lies are built on truth. As Kalen began to speak, Shaw felt something shift within him, a purpose taking root where only emptiness had existed for years. He glanced over at Elu, still absorbed in her drawings, unaware that her future hung in the balance. A child without an identity, just like the copper-haired girl. This time, his hesitation would not come too late. The next 48 hours passed in a blur of intense activity. Shaw worked almost without pause, emerging from deep coding trances only to consume the nutrient packets Kalen pressed into his hands. Creating a new identity wasn't simply a matter of forging documentation. Modern systems required complete biometric profiles, consistent data trails, and historical footprints that could withstand scrutiny. For Kalen, whose pure Sylvani genetics were well documented in various databases, the challenge was substantial. For Elu, with her hybrid physiology, it was unprecedented. Hold still, Shaw instructed the child as he calibrated the bioscanner. The device, salvaged from a decommissioned medical facility, hummed softly as it mapped Elu's unique genetic signature. Elu sat perfectly motionless on the examination table, her eyes fixed on Shaw with that same solemn intensity. Over the past days, she had begun to speak more, her soft voice gaining confidence as she formed simple sentences in the common tongue. "Tao making me real?" she asked as the scanner completed its cycle. The question caught Shaw off guard. He glanced up from the readouts to find Elu watching him expectantly. "You're already real," he replied, uncomfortable with the philosophical territory. "I'm just making the system recognize that reality." Elu considered this, her small brow furrowing. "Why system not see me?" From across the workshop, where she was assembling composite clothing with embedded identity markers, Kalen looked up sharply. They had been careful not to discuss the darker aspects of their situation in front of the child. Shaw hesitated, uncertain how to explain systemic oppression to a 4-year-old. "The system has bad eyes," he said finally. "It doesn't see everyone it should. So sometimes people like me have to help it see better." Elu nodded as if this made perfect sense. "You fix system eyes." She pointed to the glowing data streams on his monitor. "Make good eyes." "Something like that," Shaw muttered, returning to his work. The bioscan results were troubling. Elu's hybrid nature expressed itself in ways that standard identity protocols weren't designed to accommodate. Her cellular structure, energy signature, neural patterns, all existed in a twilight zone between human and Sylvani parameters. Creating a profile that could pass automated scans would require more than clever coding. It would require fundamental alterations to the recognition algorithms themselves. Late that night, after Kalen had finally succumbed to exhaustion and Elu slept curled beside her, Shaw continued to work. The sweepers had reached Sector 4 faster than he'd anticipated. Their systematic progression through the Undercity was visible on his security feeds, each cleared sector going dark as communications were severed. A message notification blinked on his secondary terminal. One of his information contacts, a maintenance worker with access to sweeper communications, had sent an encrypted update. Target profile, Sylvani female plus juvenile hybrid. Primary search objective, retrieval priority. Alpha, all sectors on lockdown until located. Shaw's stomach tightened. Priority Alpha meant they were pulling out all stops, full biometric scanning, door-to-door searches, reward incentives for information. The net was closing. He turned back to the identity construction, attacking the problem from a new angle. If he couldn't make Elu's biometrics conform to standard parameters, perhaps he could alter the parameters themselves. It would require accessing the central identity database, a feat he hadn't attempted since his escape years ago. The risk was enormous. Using his old access pathways would leave traces that could be followed back to his location. But without that access, the identities he created would never withstand priority alpha scrutiny. As he deliberated, a small sound drew his attention. Elu stood in the shadows nearby, watching him with those unsettlingly perceptive eyes. "Bad dreams?" Shaw asked quietly, mindful of Kalen's sleeping form. Elu shook her head. "You worried," she stated simply. Not a question. Shaw considered denying it, then thought better of it. The child seemed to have an uncanny ability to detect emotional states, perhaps another aspect of her hybrid physiology. "Yes," he admitted. "The people looking for you and your mother are getting closer." Elu processed this information with the directness of childhood. "Will they take us away?" "No." The vehemence in his own voice surprised him. "No, they won't." The child approached his workstation, her small feet silent on the metal floor. She placed a hand on the edge of his console, her naturally luminescent skin casting a soft glow over the instruments. "Tao will save us," she said with perfect confidence. Something about her trust, so absolute, so unearned, strengthened Shaw's resolve. He would access the central database. He would alter the parameters. He would give this child a chance that the copper-haired girl never received. "Go back to sleep, Elu," he said gently. "Tomorrow will be a long day." The child nodded, but before turning away, she reached out and touched his hand. The gesture, so simple and so profound, sent an unexpected warmth through Shaw's chest. "Night, Dad," she murmured, then padded back to her sleeping area. Shaw sat frozen, the word echoing in his mind. "Dad, not Tao. Dad." It had been a linguistic slip, surely. A child's confusion between languages and roles. Yet the impact of those 3 letters rocked him more deeply than he could have anticipated. With renewed determination, he turned back to his terminal and began the dangerous process of accessing the central database. Whatever price he might pay, it would be worth it to ensure that Elu, the child who called him Dad, would never know the terror of being erased. The hours blurred as Shaw navigated the labyrinthine security protocols of Chrysom's identity infrastructure. Each firewall he breached, each encryption he decoded brought him closer to his goal and increased the danger of detection. By morning, his eyes burned with fatigue, but triumph buzzed through his veins. He had successfully created a shadow pathway into the system's core. Kaylin found him still at his terminal as the artificial dawn brightened the workshop. She placed a hand on his shoulder, concern evident in her luminescence. "Have you slept at all?" she asked, studying the complex data structures on the screen. "Sleep is overrated," Shaw replied, his voice hoarse. "I found a way in. We can create identities that will hold up to any scrutiny, even priority alpha." Kaylin's glow brightened in alarm. "They've escalated to alpha? When?" "Last night. They're moving faster than expected." Shaw rubbed his bloodshot eyes. "We need to accelerate our timeline. The identities will be ready by tonight, but we'll need an extraction plan. Once I initialize these profiles, they'll trace the access point eventually. How long will we have?" "Hours, not days." Shaw pulled up a map of Chryson below. "There's an old transport tunnel here in Sector 6. Maintenance vehicles use it to move between levels. If we can reach it, we might be able to stow away on a cargo lift to the mid-levels." Kaylin studied the route, her expression troubled. "That's 3 sectors away. With sweepers active, the risk of interception is high," Shaw finished. "But staying is certain capture. Once these identities activate, you'll have legal status again, enough to pass routine checks. You just need to get us somewhere with less scrutiny." "The outland settlements," Kaylin suggested, "beyond the city parameters. They're desperate enough for skilled workers that they might not look too closely at documentation." Shaw nodded. It was a sound plan, dangerous but feasible. "I'll need Elu for the final biometric imprinting this afternoon. Then we'll make our move after midnight, when the shift changes create security gaps." As he spoke, Elu emerged from their sleeping corner, rubbing her eyes. She smiled when she saw Shaw, her skin brightening in what he now recognized as a Sylvani expression of affection. "Morning, Tao," she said, approaching to examine his work with her usual curiosity. Shaw felt a pang at her return to his original designation, though he chided himself for the sentiment. Better that way. Safer for all of them if attachments remained minimal. "Big day today, Elu," he told her. "We're going to finish your new identity." The child's eyes widened with interest. "I be real to system?" "That's right. You and your mother both." As Kaylin prepared their morning meal, Shaw continued refining the identity parameters. The basic scaffolding was complete: new biometric profiles, historical records, residence histories, but the details needed perfecting. For Kaylin, he'd created the identity of Lumi Aston, a registered Sylvani immigrant with clearance for specialized maintenance work. For Elu, he'd crafted Elu Virus, acknowledging her true name while giving her the protection of official status. For himself, he'd created nothing. This was their journey, not his. Once they were safely away, he would disappear deeper into Chryson below, find a new workshop, resume his solitary existence. It was better that way. Safer. At least, that's what he told himself as he watched Elu carefully arrange her few possessions, mostly drawings she'd created during their time together. She had an organization system only she understood, separating the images into precise categories before stowing them in a small pack Kaylin had fashioned from salvage materials. "You'll need to leave those behind," Shaw said, nodding toward the drawings. "Travel light. Essentials only." Elu looked up at him, dismay evident in her dimming glow. "But they're stories. Our stories." Shaw opened his mouth to insist, then stopped at the look in her eyes. Not tantrums or childish petulance. Genuine distress at the thought of losing what might be the only consistent thing in her young, chaotic life. "We'll make room," he conceded, returning to his work as Elu's glow brightened once more. The day progressed with tense efficiency. Shaw completed the identity frameworks while Kalen prepared for their journey, gathering supplies and studying the route maps. Elu alternated between helping her mother and sitting quietly with Shaw as he worked, asking occasional questions about the glowing data streams that fascinated her. Tripwires, reroutable power grids, false heat signatures, paranoia made manifest in code and circuitry, reveal a spreading necrosis where his gill modifications met human tissue. Incompatibility syndrome. Got maybe a month left. Might as well make it count. Before Shaw could respond, the main door buckled inward. Metal screamed as hydraulic forces overwhelmed the reinforced locks. Go, Vex urged, slipping through the hatch. And tell someone I did one decent thing, yeah? Shaw hesitated for just a moment, then nodded once. Understanding passed between them, the acknowledgement of one outcast to another. As Vex disappeared into the maintenance corridor, Shaw ushered Kalen and Elu toward a concealed exit behind his primary server stack. The wall panel slid aside to reveal a narrow passage, his final escape route, prepared years ago but never used. This leads to the sublevels, he explained, handing Kalen a small illumination rod. Follow it to Junction S-17, then take the east tunnel. I'll be right behind you. Kalen clutched the portable unit containing their new identities. Shaw, go. Now. He activated a small tracking device and pressed it into her hand. This will lead you to the processing plant. Wait for me there. As Kalen and Elu disappeared into the darkness, Shaw returned to his workstation. The main door gave way with a final metallic shriek. Armored figures poured into the workshop, weapons raised, scanning equipment, sweeping methodically across every surface. Shaw triggered his final countermeasure, a cascading system failure designed to wipe all data and fry the physical components beyond recovery. Sparks erupted from terminals as circuits overloaded. Smoke filled the air, obscuring his movement as he slipped into the hidden passage, sealing it behind him. In the darkness of the maintenance tunnel, Shaw moved with the confidence of someone who had mentally rehearsed this escape 1,000 times. Each intersection, each access panel was mapped in his memory. He could hear the sweepers behind him, their methodical progress slowed by the unfamiliar territory and his sabotage efforts. As he navigated the labyrinthine passages, Shaw's thoughts turned to Kalen and Elu. They had their new identities now. They could make it to the outland settlements without him. Perhaps it would be better that way, cleaner. No attachments, no complications. He could disappear into the depths of Chrysum below, start over as he had before. The image of Elu's face appeared unbidden in his mind. Her solemn eyes, her quiet voice calling him Dad in that unguarded moment. Something tightened in his chest, an unfamiliar sensation he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Distant shouts echoed through the tunnels. The sweepers had found his trail. Shaw increased his pace, focusing on the route to the processing plant. 20 minutes, Vex had said. He checked his timepiece. 18 had already elapsed. The old processing plant loomed ahead, a dilapidated structure of corroded metal and broken machinery. Once it had converted raw materials into construction components. Now it stood as a hollow monument to industrial obsolescence. Shaw slipped through a collapsed wall section, scanning for movement. The cavernous interior was silent except for the steady drip of condensation from exposed pipes. Kalen, he called softly, moving deeper into the shadows. Elu. A faint glow emanated from behind a massive processing unit. Shaw approached cautiously, stunner ready. The light brightened as he drew nearer, the distinctive luminescence of a Sylvani. Kalen emerged from concealment, Elu clutching her hand. Relief washed over her features as she recognized Shaw. You made it, she breathed. I heard explosions. My workshop is gone, Shaw confirmed grimly, along with everything in it. But your identities are secure. Did Vex find you? Kalen shook her head. We haven't seen anyone. Shaw checked his timepiece again. 25 minutes had passed since they'd separated. Vex should have been here by now. A distant clamor echoed through the plant, the unmistakable sound of sweeper teams coordinating. They were closing in. We can't wait any longer, Shaw decided. The maintenance shaft should be near the eastern wall. They moved carefully through the decaying machinery, Shaw leading the way with Kalen and Elu following closely. The sweepers' voices grew louder, accompanied by the systematic beep of scanning equipment. The eastern wall came into view, and with it the sealed maintenance hatch Vex had described. Shaw examined the control panel. Dead. Of course it would be. Stand back, he told Kalen, pulling a small tool from his pack. The device, a concentrated electromagnetic pulse generator, was one of his more valuable possessions, capable of temporarily disabling most security systems. He placed it against the panel and activated the sequence. The hatch remained stubbornly sealed. It's not electronic, Shaw realized with growing dread. It's a manual lock. From the other side, the sounds of the approaching sweepers grew. More distinct. They had minutes, perhaps less. Promise of potential escape drove them forward. Finally, they emerged into a vast underground chamber unlike anything Shaw had ever seen in Chrysom Below. Natural stone pillars rose to a distant ceiling where small fissures allowed thin beams of genuine sunlight to penetrate, not the artificial illumination of the city, but actual, unfiltered daylight. The outer caverns, Shaw breathed in disbelief. I've heard rumors, but never. Kalen's luminescence brightened with hope. Is this beyond the city boundaries? It must be. These caverns extend beneath the wastelands surrounding Chrysom. Shaw studied the light sources above. Those fissures must reach the surface. Elu pointed excitedly. Up there. Big hole. Following her indication, they spotted a larger opening in the chamber's ceiling, a jagged gap that revealed a patch of actual sky. Distant but attainable via a series of natural stone ledges that formed a makeshift path upward. Hope surged through Shaw, a foreign, almost forgotten sensation. If we can reach that opening, we'll be outside Chrysom's jurisdiction, beyond the reach of his sweepers. The climb was arduous. Shaw went first, testing each handhold before signaling Kalen to follow with Elu. The child, surprisingly agile for her age, needed little assistance, her hybrid physiology adapting naturally to the vertical challenge. As they ascended, the patch of sky grew larger, brighter. Shaw could make out colors he hadn't seen in years. The deep blue of approaching evening, tinged with the amber of sunset. The air grew cooler, fresher, carrying scents he had almost forgotten existed. When Shaw finally pulled himself through the opening, the sensory impact was overwhelming. He stood motionless, stunned by the expanse of open sky above him. Actual clouds drifted across the horizon. A genuine breeze, not the recycled air currents of Chrysom Below, caressed his face. They had emerged on a rocky hillside, overlooking a vast wasteland. In the distance, the glittering towers of Upper Chrysom rose like a mirage, surrounded by the industrial haze of the mid-levels. From this vantage point, the city looked smaller somehow, less intimidating. Kalen and Elu joined him moments later, their reactions mirroring his own awestruck silence. For Elu, who had spent her entire young life underground, the open sky was an entirely new reality. Her luminescence pulsed with excitement as she spun in circles, trying to take in the 360-degree horizon. Is it real? She asked, reaching up as if to touch the sky itself. All this. It's real, Shaw confirmed, his voice rough with emotion. This is the world without walls. Kalen's glow dimmed with sudden concern. The sweepers won't look for us out here, Shaw finished. Not immediately, at least. They'll assume we're still trying to reach the transport tunnels. He surveyed their surroundings more practically. The wasteland stretched for miles in all directions, a barren expanse of rocky terrain and hardy, mutated vegetation. Not hospitable, but not immediately lethal either. And somewhere out there, beyond the city's influence, lay the outland settlements Kalen had mentioned. We should move before dark, Shaw decided. There must be a path down from these hills. As they began their descent, Shaw found himself continually glancing back at Chrysom. For 2 decades, those walls had contained his entire existence, his prison and his protection. Now, for the first time since his desperate flight from the upper levels, he stood outside them, free but exposed, unconfined but unsheltered. The sun was setting by the time they reached level ground, casting long shadows across the wasteland. In the gathering darkness, Kalen and Elu's natural luminescence provided gentle illumination, enough to navigate by without attracting undue attention. The settlements should be northeast of here, Kalen said, orienting herself by the stars beginning to appear overhead. 2, maybe 3 days' journey on foot. Shaw nodded, calculating their supplies. They had enough water for perhaps 3 days if they rationed carefully. Food would be more problematic. The emergency rations he grabbed would last 2 days at most. We'll need to forage, he said, eyeing the strange vegetation dubiously. Some of these plants must be edible. Kalen surprised him with a small smile. Sylvanis are excellent foragers. Our ancestral homeworld had much harsher conditions than this. I can identify safe options. As they established a temporary camp in the shelter of a rocky outcropping, Shaw found himself watching Elu as she explored their immediate surroundings with boundless curiosity. Every stone, every twisted plant was a new discovery. Her unfettered delight in these simple experiences stirred something profound within him, a bittersweet ache for all the normal childhood moments she had been denied. When Kalen returned with several edible tubers and a handful of moisture-rich succulent plants, they shared a meager but satisfying meal. The temperature dropped rapidly with nightfall, and they huddled together for warmth, Elu nestled between them. What will happen when we reach the settlements? Shaw asked quietly as Elu drifted towards sleep. Kalen considered the question carefully. With our new identities, we should be able to secure basic housing and work. The demand for skilled labor outweighs concerns about documentation in the Outlands. She glanced at him. We could start over. All of us. The implication hung in the air between them. Shaw had assumed their paths would diverge once they reached safety, that his role in their story would conclude with their escape. Yet here, under the vast canopy of actual stars, such artificial boundaries seemed suddenly arbitrary. I don't know how to be anything but what I've been, he admitted, the darkness making honesty easier. A forger, a ghost, a man hiding from his past. And what about Tao? Kalen asked gently. The maker? The protector? Before Shaw could respond, Elu stirred between them. Dad stays, she murmured sleepily, her small hand finding his in the darkness. Dad belongs. The simple certainty in her voice rendered him speechless. Shaw looked to Kalen, expecting discomfort at her daughter's presumption. Instead, he found her watching him with an expression of quiet hope. She sees you, Kalen said simply. Not what you were or what you've done, just who you are to her. She paused. To us. Shaw felt something crumble within him, the last defensive wall around emotions he'd buried for too long. In the darkness of the wasteland, with Chrysam's lights a distant glow on the horizon, he allowed himself to imagine a different life, a new identity of his own making. I don't know if I remember how to belong, he confessed. Kalen's luminescence brightened gently, her hand finding his atop Elu's sleeping form. Then we'll remind you. The journey across the wasteland took 4 days, not 3. They traveled primarily at night, using Kalen and Elu's natural luminescence to navigate while avoiding the harsh daytime temperatures. During daylight hours, they sheltered in whatever shade they could find, rationing their dwindling supplies with increasing strictness. Water became their primary concern. Shaw's emergency supply was exhausted by the 3rd day, forcing them to rely on Kalen's knowledge of desert flora. The moisture-rich plants sustained them, but barely. Their lips cracked, their movements slowed, and Elu's luminescence dimmed to conserve energy. Despite these hardships, Shaw observed a resilience in his companions that both humbled and inspired him. Kalen never complained, focusing instead on keeping Elu's spirits high with stories of her homeworld and promises of a life awaiting them. The child, though clearly affected by the harsh conditions, maintained a determined optimism that sometimes brought an unexpected lump to Shaw's throat. On the 4th night, as they crested a rocky ridge, lights appeared in the distance. Not the overwhelming blaze of Chrysum, but the scattered illumination of smaller, independent structures. The outland settlement. We made it, Kaelin breathed, her voice hoarse from thirst but vibrant with relief. Elu, riding on Shaw's shoulders to rest her tired legs, pointed excitedly. Houses. Real houses. Shaw studied the settlement with a more cautious eye. From this distance, he could make out a collection of modular structures arranged in concentric circles around what appeared to be a central water processing facility. Solar arrays glinted in the moonlight, and the silhouettes of primitive agriculture domes suggested self-sufficiency. No corporate logos illuminated the night sky here. No identity scanners monitored movement between sectors. Remember, he cautioned as they began their descent toward the settlement, your identities should hold, but minimizing official scrutiny is still wise. Kaelin nodded, adjusting her clothing to better conceal her natural luminescence, a Silvani trait that, while not illegal, might attract unwanted attention even here. Elu, too young to fully control her glow, was wrapped in an extra layer of fabric. They approached the settlement's perimeter as dawn broke. A simple security fence surrounded the community, more to keep out wasteland predators than to control human movement. Near what appeared to be the main entrance, a small queue had formed, workers reporting for early shifts at the water facility or agricultural domes. Shaw observed the security protocols with professional interest. Identity verification seemed perfunctory, a basic scan rather than the invasive biometric analysis used in Chrysum. The settlement security officer, a weather-beaten woman with the cybernetic enhancements common among wasteland dwellers, barely glanced at each person before waving them through. Follow my lead, Shaw instructed quietly. Act tired but not desperate. We're simply new arrivals, looking for work. When their turn came, Shaw presented the portable unit containing their identity profiles. The security officer ran a cursory scan, eyebrows rising slightly at the Silvani designations. Technical skills? She asked Kaelin directly. Environmental systems, Kaelin replied, the story they had practiced emerging naturally. Specialized in vent maintenance and moisture reclamation. The officer nodded approvingly. We can use that. Settlements expanded faster than infrastructure. Systems are overloaded. Her gaze shifted to Elu, then Shaw. Family unit? A moment of tension hung between them. Shaw opened his mouth to deny it, to maintain the fiction of professional association that seemed safer. Yes, Kaelin answered before he could speak. We're together. The officer made a notation in her system. Housing units are scarce. Family designation gets you priority for a double module instead of singles. Report to administration for assignment and work placement. She waved them through with the same efficiency she'd shown the others, already turning her attention to the next arrival. Just like that, they were in. Nos sirens, nos vers, no delecho. Shaw felt an unfamiliar lightness in his chest as they walked into the settlement, something that might, in another lifetime, have been recognized as hope. The settlement's interior revealed a community more vibrant than its exterior suggested. Though constructed primarily from recycled materials and modular units, the inhabitants had brought color and life to the harsh environment. Vertical gardens climbed the sides of buildings. Children, actual playing children, darted between structures. Vendors sold local produce and salvaged goods from small stalls. The administration building stood at the center of the settlement, a repurposed shipping container distinguished by its faded blue paint and the settlement's simple emblem, a stylized water droplet encircled by gear. Inside, a harried official processed their arrival with minimal questions. Housing assignment, work details, and basic orientation materials were provided with efficient brevity. The entire process took less than 30 minutes, a stark contrast to the bureaucratic labyrinths of Chrysum. Unit 47, East Quadrant, the administrator informed them, handing over an activation key. Basic but functional. Water rations begin tomorrow. Employment orientation at 0800. Their assigned housing unit proved to be exactly as described. Basic but functional. A converted cargo container divided into two small rooms, equipped with minimal furnishings and a tiny hygiene cubicle. By Chrysum below standards, it was luxurious. By upper Chrysum standards, it was barely habitable. By their recent wasteland standards, it was paradise. Elu claimed the smaller room immediately, delighting in the simple novelty of a space to call her own. As she arranged her precious drawings on the metal wall, her luminescence brightened to a glow that required no concealment here within their private space. "She seems happy," Shaw observed, watching from the doorway. Kaylin stood beside him, her own glow reflecting her emotional state. "She is." Children adapt quickly. This place, it's not perfect, but it's something we never had in Chrysum. Freedom. Freedom with limitations, Shaw amended, ever the pragmatist. The settlement has its own rules, its own constraints. But choices within those constraints, Kaylin countered. Real choices. Shaw couldn't argue with that. Even in this first day, he'd witnessed more genuine autonomy than existed in all of Chrysum's carefully controlled environments. That night, after Elu had fallen asleep in her new room, exhausted but content, Shaw and Kaylin sat together on the unit's small exterior step. Above them, stars punctuated the clear desert sky, more stars than Shaw could remember ever seeing. "What will you do now?" Kaylin asked quietly. "Your skills would be valuable here. Identity management is always needed in places like this, where people come to start over." Shaw considered the question. For so long, his existence had been defined by necessity and survival. The concept of choice, of pursuing something for reasons beyond mere continuation, felt foreign. "I don't know," he admitted. "I've been running for so long that stopping feels unnatural." Kaylin's luminescence softened in the darkness. "You're not running now. You're arriving." The distinction resonated with unexpected clarity. Shaw looked back toward the unit where Elu slept peacefully. Running had been his life for decades. But perhaps arriving, truly arriving somewhere to someone, was what he had been searching for all along. 3 months later, Elu stood proudly before the settlement's small school building, newly constructed from repurposed materials by the community's collective effort. Her luminescence glowed bright with excitement, no longer hidden but celebrated as part of her unique heritage. "Do I look right?" she asked, spinning to display the simple uniform, salvaged fabric dyed with local pigments, emblazoned with the settlement's water droplet emblem. "Perfect," Kaylin assured her, adjusting the small pack containing Elu's prized drawings and new learning materials. Shaw knelt to Elu's level, something that had become easier with practice. "Remember what we talked about? If anyone asks about your name, I'm Elu Virus," she recited confidently. "My mother is Lumi Aston. You are Shaw Virus. We came from outer Chrysum seeking better opportunities." She grinned, revealing the gap where a baby tooth had recently fallen out. "I practiced." "You did," Shaw acknowledged, his chest tightening with that now familiar mixture of pride and protectiveness. "And after school, come straight to the workshop," Elu continued dutifully. "No detours, no telling stories about before." Her expression grew solemn with the importance of these rules, the only restrictions they placed on her otherwise joyful exploration of their new life. Other children began arriving with their parents, filling the area with chatter and movement. Elu watched them with eager anticipation, her first real opportunity to interact with peers. "Go on," Kaylin encouraged gently. "We'll be right here when you finish." Elu hugged them both quickly, then darted toward the school entrance, her natural luminescence pulsing with excitement. At the door, she turned back to wave one more time before disappearing inside. Shaw and Kaylin stood watching long after she had gone, caught in the surreal normality of the moment. "She'll be fine," Kaylin said finally, though whether reassuring Shaw or herself wasn't entirely clear. "She will," Shaw agreed. "She's stronger than both of us." They walked together toward the settlement's industrial sector, where they had both found employment, Kaylin in environmental systems as planned, Shaw in security infrastructure. His understanding of identity verification had proven invaluable to the growing settlement, which struggled to balance security needs with its ethos of second chances. Their workshop, a a modest space they'd established with their combined earnings, stood at the boundary between industrial and residential sectors. Not unlike Shaw's old workshop in function, but fundamentally different in purpose. Here they built and repaired, but openly, legitimately. Here, they existed not in shadows, but in daylight. As they parted for their respective duties, Kalen's luminescence brightened momentarily, the Silvani equivalent of a kiss. The gesture still caught Shaw off guard sometimes, though he had learned to return it with a small smile that Kalen insisted was equally expressive to her perceptive eyes. Later that evening, as rain clouds gathered over the settlement, real rain, not the acid precipitation of Chrysum, Shaw stood at the window of their expanded housing unit. They had added a third room over the past months, gradually transforming the utilitarian space into something that felt increasingly like home. Behind him, Elu chattered excitedly to Kalen about her first day of school. The new friends, the learning modules, the teacher who knew about Silvani culture and asked her to share traditions with the class. "And I told them about light speaking," she exclaimed, demonstrating by modulating her luminescence in the patterns Kalen had taught her. Maya asked if I could teach her, but I said humans can't glow. She paused thoughtfully. Maybe we could make a device that glows for them, so they can speak too. Perhaps, Kalen replied, encouraging as always. What do you think, Shaw? A translator for light speaking. Shaw turned from the window, the inventor in him automatically considering the technical challenges, while another part, a part he was still growing accustomed to, simply marveled at the child's compassionate innovation. It could work, he acknowledged. We need specialized photoreceptors, a modulation algorithm. Rain began to fall outside, gentle drops that nourished the settlement's precious agricultural efforts. Not something to hide from, but something to celebrate. Elu pressed her face to the window, watching the raindrops create patterns on the glass. It's washing everything clean, she observed, like when you washed our faces after the wasteland journey. Shaw remembered that moment, their arrival at the settlement, exhausted and filthy from days in the desert. The luxury of actual water on their skin, washing away the grime of Chrysum below, the dust of the wasteland, the metaphorical weight of lives spent hiding. New beginnings need clean starts, he said, the words emerging before he could analyze them. Kalen's luminescence brightened in response. She understood the significance of such unguarded sentiment from a man who had spent decades calculating every word, every action for maximum security and minimum exposure. As the evening progressed, they established the routine that had become there. Anchor, Elu's homework, a shared meal of settlement-grown produce supplemented by protein rations, stories exchanged about their respective days. The rhythms of normal life that had once seemed unattainable fantasy. Later, after Elu had been tucked into bed with promises of workshop time the following afternoon, Shaw and Kalen sat together in the quiet of their small living space. Rain continued to fall outside, creating a gentle percussion on the metal roof. I received a communication from administration today, Kalen said, her luminescence dimmed to intimate levels. They're expanding the settlement's environmental systems next month. They've asked me to lead the integration team. That's significant recognition, Shaw observed. You've impressed them. It's a permanent position, Kalen clarified, with residential security attached. For all of us. The implication settled between them. Permanence. Official recognition of their family unit within the settlement's governance structure. No more temporary status. No more contingency plans for sudden departure. Shaw's instinct, honed by decades of survival, was to identify the dangers, the vulnerabilities such commitment would create. Yet those concerns felt increasingly distant, like relics from another lifetime. What did you tell them? He asked instead. That I needed to consult my family. Kalen's gaze held his, her luminescence revealing emotions her words didn't express. This isn't just my decision. Family. The word still startled him sometimes, though he'd come to accept its accuracy. The three of them had formed something that transcended convenient arrangement or temporary alliance. Something he'd never expected to experience after fleeing into Chrysum below all those years ago. Elu would thrive with the stability, he acknowledged, focusing first on the practical aspects. Her development at the school has been remarkable. Continuity would benefit her. And you? Kaelin asked softly. Would stability benefit Shah Virus as well? The name, his new identity, crafted alongside theirs, still felt like borrowed clothing. Not uncomfortable, but not yet worn to the perfect fit of his own skin. Yet with each passing day, each small domestic moment, each problem solved together, it settled more naturally upon him. I've never had it, he admitted. Stability, permanence. I don't know if I'm built for it. You weren't built for anything, Kaelin countered gently. You chose. You're still choosing every day. Her luminescence fluctuated with emphasis. The man who hid in Chrysum below could never have thrived here as you have. The skills remain, but the purpose has changed. Shah considered this. His expertise in identity systems now protected the settlement from exploitation rather than enabling desperate escapes. His mechanical knowledge helped build rather than merely survive. His caution had transformed gradually from paranoia to prudence. I want to stay, he said finally, the simple truth feeling revolutionary on his tongue. I want this to continue. Kaelin's glow brightened with unmistakable joy. Her hand found his, their fingers intertwining in a gesture that had become familiar, yet never lost its significance. Then we accept the position, she decided. We build something lasting here. That night, as Kaelin slept beside him, Shah found himself drawn once more to the window. The rain had stopped, leaving behind puddles that reflected the settlement's lights and the stars above. In one such reflection, he caught a glimpse of his own face, older than he remembered, lined by hardship, yet somehow less haunted than the man who had opened his door to desperate knocking all those months ago. Chrysum was invisible from here, hidden beyond the horizon. Yet its shadow remained, in their forged identities, in their practiced caution, in the nightmares that sometimes still plagued Shah's sleep. They would never be entirely free of it. The past could not be deleted as easily as an identity file. But perhaps, Shah thought as he watched the water slowly absorbing into the thirsty desert soil, that was as it should be. Their history had shaped them, had brought them together, had forged a bond that mere circumstance could never have created. The copper-haired girl whose file he had hesitated over. He would never know her fate, never absolve himself of that failure. But in Elu's future, perhaps he had found a different kind of redemption. 1 year later, Shah stood at the edge of the settlement's newly established memorial garden. What had once been barren wasteland now bloomed with hardy desert flora, plants that had adapted to harsh conditions without surrendering their essential nature, much like the settlers themselves. The garden commemorated those lost during the settlement's difficult early years, when resources were scarce and survival uncertain. Simple stone markers bore names and dates, maintaining connection with those who had helped build this improbable community at the edge of Chrysum's influence. Among them stood a marker Shah had crafted himself. It bore no name, only the word maker in stylized script that incorporated elements of both human and Sylvani artistic traditions. Beneath this, a single line, he showed others the way out. Vex had never reached the settlement. Whether captured by sweepers or overcome by his advancing illness, they would never know. But his final act of defiance, creating diversion for strangers' escape, deserved recognition. In another life, another system, he might have been deemed unworthy of remembrance. Here, his choice mattered more than his history. Dad! Elu's voice pulled Shah from his contemplation. She approached rapidly, her natural luminescence bright with excitement despite the daylight that rendered it subtle to casual observation. At 6 years old, she had grown taller, her hybrid features developing in ways that highlighted both her human and Sylvani heritage. In the settlement's diverse community, such uniqueness was celebrated rather than feared. Look what I made in fabrication class. She thrust a small device toward him, a crudely constructed but functional light emitter designed to mimic Sylvani luminescence patterns. Now, Maya, can light speak with me? We programmed 5 basic patterns. Shah examined the creation with genuine interest. The circuitry showed impressive intuition, if imperfect execution. Clever design, he acknowledged. But you've overloaded this junction. See how it's heating up? That will burn out your power cell quickly. Elu frowned thoughtfully. Can we fix it at the workshop? Of course. The workshop, once his fortress of solitude in Chrysum below, had transformed into a family space where Elu's natural aptitude for engineering flourished under their combined guidance. Your mother will be impressed with the concept. Pride brightened Elu's features. Teacher says I can present it at the Innovation Fair next month. A cultural exchange tool. She tucked the device carefully into her school bag. Tommy says his dad used to work in Chrysum. Is that true? The question, innocent yet loaded with implications, momentarily caught Shaw off guard. They had never hidden the truth of their origins from Elu, but discussions of Chrysum remained carefully framed. Many settlement residents were refugees from the city's oppressive systems, yet few spoke openly about those experiences. Many people here came from Chrysum, Shaw confirmed cautiously. Everyone has different reasons for leaving. Elu considered this with the directness characteristic of her age. Were we lucky to get out? Images flashed through Shaw's mind, his workshop door opening to reveal desperate faces, the sweepers breaching his security, their frantic escape through waste chutes and caverns. Luck had played its part, certainly, but so had choice, courage, and connection. We made our own luck, he said finally. Together. This answer seemed to satisfy Elu, whose attention had already shifted to a group of children playing in the settlement's central courtyard. Can I join them before workshop time? Shaw nodded, watching as she ran toward her friends, carefree in ways he had never experienced at her age, or any age until recently. Kaylin found him there sometime later, still observing the children's play from a distance. Her luminescence, visible even in daylight to his accustomed eyes, reflected contentment as she stood beside him. Admiring your handiwork, she asked, nodding toward Vex's memorial marker. Remembering, Shaw clarified, the paths that led here. Kaylin's expression softened with understanding. Anniversary thoughts? It had been exactly 1 year since they'd accepted permanent positions within the settlement, since they'd chosen to stop running and start building. 1 year of legitimate existence after decades in shadow. Something like that, Shaw acknowledged. Elu asked about Chrysum today. She's curious. It's natural. Kaylin watched her daughter among the other children, seamlessly integrated despite her unique heritage. She'll have questions as she grows older. About where she came from. About her father. About who we were before, Shaw added. The thought no longer filled him with the dread it once might have. Elu was intelligent and perceptive. Honesty, carefully modulated for her age and understanding, had always been their approach. We'll answer as best we can, Kaylin said simply, piece by piece, as she's ready. As the sun began its descent toward the horizon, families throughout the settlement began their evening routines. Workers returned from various projects. Communal cooking fires were lit in the central gathering spaces. The rhythms of a community defined not by corporate mandates or identity classifications, but by shared purpose and mutual support. We should collect Elu for dinner, Kaylin suggested. She has that light-speaking device to show you. She already did, Shaw replied with a faint smile that had become less rare over time. Ambitious design. Needs refinement. Like her father, Kaylin observed, her luminescence pulsing with affectionate teasing. Always seeing what needs fixing. The comparison, casual but profound, struck Shaw deeply. Not the man who had deleted identities, but the man who created them. Not the solitary figure hiding from past sins, but the father guiding future potential. As they called Elu to join them, as they walked together toward the communal meal area, as they exchanged greetings with neighbors who knew them by their chosen names, Shaw felt the weight of Chrysum recede another fraction. Not forgotten, never that, but gradually recontextualized within a larger narrative. One where please, I just need a job, had transformed into please pass the salt. Where desperate knocking had evolved into open doors. Where 3 outcasts had become a family. Later that night, as a rare storm gathered on the horizon, real rain, Clean rain, life-giving rain. Shaw sat with Kaelin on the small porch of their expanded dwelling. Elu slept inside, surrounded by her inventions and drawings, secure in the knowledge that tomorrow would unfold with reliable consistency. "Do you ever think about going back?" Kaelin asked quietly, watching lightning illuminate the distant wasteland. "Just to see what's become of Chrysum?" Shaw considered the question thoughtfully. Once Chrysum had been his entire world, first as a loyal deletion specialist, then as a fugitive forger. Its rhythms and dangers had defined his existence for decades. "No," he said finally. "That door is closed." Lightning flashed again, briefly illuminating the settlement, the garden, the school, the workshop where they built rather than hid. A community of second chances and new identities, chosen rather than assigned. New doors opened, he added, finding Kaelin's hand in the darkness. Rain began to fall, gentle at first, then with increasing intensity. They remained on the porch, sheltered but not separated from the cleansing downpour. Each drop represented possibility, for growth, for renewal, for continuation. For a man who had once defined himself by what he erased, there was profound peace in building something that would remain.